Today, just before 5 p.m., the 15th of October, 40 years ago, there was a railway truck that cruised down Thornton Road in Athlone. It cruised down once before because it did a reconnaissance ride. And when it came back with young people, students who were protesting at the time, started pelting this van and threw it with rocks and bashed in the windows. But this is when security police, apartheid era policemen, they got up, hidden behind railway containers, and they started shooting live rounds at the groups and the crowds of mainly children, young people who had gathered along Thornton Road. So on this day, 15th of October, we commemorate the 40th anniversary of what's called the Trojan Horse Massacre, where 3 young people were killed. Jonathan Claassen was 21 years old, Sean Mahmoud was 15, and Michael Miranda was just 11 years old. Michael Miranda, if he was still alive, he'd still be what I assume would be a healthy, productive, and contributing 51-year-old to the South African society. But how the world came to know about that particular video was because it was captured by Chris Everson, who at that time was a young camera operator for CBS News. And his footage broadcast globally, exposing the brutality of apartheid to the world. Chris Everson joins me now on the line. Chris, really appreciate your time and thanks so much for chatting to us 40 years on today. Maybe take us back and some of your reflections, some of your memories. Describe the tone and feel of Thornton Road today, 40 years ago.
Yeah, morning, Lester. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a long time. It's memories have faded quite a lot since then, but some things never go away. On that particular day, we were busy in Grassy Park, actually. We weren't in Thornton Road originally. There was some trouble in Grassy Park. Our modus operandi then was to get advantage of a high spot in somewhere around UCT, look out over the Cape Flats, see where there was smoke, follow the smoke, and generally in those days where there was smoke, there was pretty much always fire. So we went down to the event in Grassy Park. It was a bit of a nothing. We saw it every single day practically, kids throwing insults and stones at the police, and the police retaliating with tear gas and rubber bullets very often. The same thing we saw most days on the Cape Flats and the townships. So I was pretty sure that none of that event was going to get on the air that night. And while we were there, I was with my sound recordist, Nicholas Delacasa, who was a young English guy. And our fixer in those days was someone the Cape Townians would probably remember, John Rubathon, who was a stills photographer and was hired by CBS as our fixer.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And after about 5 minutes on Grassy Park, I got a message on my pager saying that there was some trouble brewing in Thornton Road, Athlone. Well, that wasn't unusual. There was always trouble in Athlone, especially after the schools came out and the colleges came out. There was pretty much always trouble. But the added attraction of Athlone was the Wembley takeaway. So we thought, well, let's head over there, get us a bunch of samosas, and that'll pass the time quite nicely. So we headed over to Athlone. Went first of all to Thornton Road before the Wembley, thank goodness. And sure enough, there was a group of people on the side of the road, a lot of kids, some of them with stones in their hands, but largely they were onlookers.
Yeah.
There was some sign that something had happened. There were stones in the street, some glass, the remnants of perhaps a tire burning. I set up my camera some distance away from the event. In those days we were very often accused of being the catalyst for violence. The cameras and the foreign press were often accused of starting violence for our own benefit. But there's clearly some truth in the fact that cameras were a catalyst. So we set the camera up some distance away on a tripod. But nothing much was going on, shot a few pictures, and then thought, well, let's pack up now and head across to the Wembley And just as I was about to take the camera off the tripod, Nicholas got my attention and said, "There's a truck coming down over your shoulder." So I turned around and there was a yellow railways truck
Yeah.
heading towards us from behind. It was a flatbed truck with some wooden crates on the back. Excuse me. And I thought, well, that is bound to get stonked by the kids. So I rolled the camera and it drove past me down towards the kids on the corner. And for some reason, which I still completely baffles me, the truck was completely unmolested. It
Yeah.
drove right through the.
You argue, and you've said before that that was already with railway and security police in those crates armed. You say that was more likely a reconnaissance mission. That truck then, after being unaffected, does a U-turn and come back the same way.
Well, I don't believe it was a reconnaissance mission. I think that they thought they were going to get stoned on the way past me, and they would have jumped out the boxes then. I think it was just setting up what took place later,
Yeah.
which makes the thing even more insidious. They went down to the bottom of Thornton Road, completely unmolested, then turned around at the bottom, came back up again. So I filmed them from some distance away, a good 100 meters away from the kids. And sure enough, when they got level with the kids, the stones started flying and the windscreen shattered. The vehicle came to a halt. I heard gunfire. I was in quite a tight shot on my camera, on my lens of the windscreen at the time. So I saw the driver duck down and another policeman sit up from underneath the seat and start firing through the window. When I zoomed out, I saw all these policemen already standing up, probably 6 of them, as I recall, firing in both directions out of the side of the truck. They couldn't possibly have known who they were firing at. They were hidden inside the boxes. So they weren't firing at anybody in particular. They just opened fire just on anybody.
So what is, I'm sure, a gruesome and horrific moment, live rounds being fired at largely children and 3 young people, including 2 minors, then get killed. What's happening in your mind at this moment? What are you thinking? Are you even questioning reality at the moment, or having been exposed to the reporting around apartheid violence, are you maybe anesthetized to already the violence that you may have seen?
That's the word, Lester. I think that having witnessed so many of these events in the last year, I'd only been with CBS for 1 year at that point. It's actually 42 years now. I'm still with them. But at that stage, I was a newcomer, and I was thrown into this incredible levels of violence. And we would see death, certainly, if not on a daily basis, certainly several times a week. We'd see bodies lying on the side of the street. And honestly, we were anesthetized to the point where at the end of this event, when Sean, Jonathan, and Michael were lying dead on the road, the ambulance was there taking away the wounded. The police were standing around before they chased us away. I was still wondering about how big a deal it was.
Wow.
I couldn't understand. I didn't see the absolute enormity of that. Because what was different about that was not that it was a unique situation at all. Happened often, not necessarily that particular ambush, but death and by policemen happened definitely on a daily basis in the country. What was unique was that there was a camera there.
Well, and that's what I want to get to. There is a camera there. And of course, you're still in apartheid South Africa. Yes, you represent then an international and a Western broadcaster, but you also know that this visuals are so sensitive. And then after this, you rush to the airport, you put it on a plane, it goes from Cape Town to, I think, Dar es Salaam, from Dar es Salaam to the United States. And as it arrives in the United States, it's put on air almost immediately. And here's why it's important. 1985, at that very time, there's the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in the Caribbean. And there was the debate there on whether there should be sanctions against South Africa. Margaret Thatcher putting up a spirited defense on why there shouldn't be sanctions. But largely because of your video She loses that debate at the Commonwealth Heads of State meeting. And that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for your video caught in Thornton, spirited to the airport, New York, via Dar es Salaam, and put on air that night.
Well, that's right. I was completely unaware of the United Nations meeting in it was in Barbados.
It was in Nassau.
In Nassau, yeah. I wasn't aware of that, of course. And honestly, as I said, I was not aware of the importance of what I just photographed to any great extent. I was naive, perhaps. I was young, and as you said, I was probably anesthetized to that kind of violence. It only became apparent probably the next day, really. Our correspondent was actually on a plane at the time. He was a Rome-based correspondent. His name Alan Pizzi. He's the one that termed that called it the Trojan Horse. He was on a plane and he was pulled off a plane. He was going home after a long stint in South Africa, and he was pulled off the plane to go back to the bureau in Johannesburg to write a script. Very, very, very unimpressed with me for pulling him off the plane like that. For our producer, perhaps I told our producer what I'd seen. He saw the importance of it, pulled Pizzi off the plane, and he wrote the script. But no, I was pretty unaware at the time of what it was that we'd photographed. It soon became apparent, though, particularly the treatment that we received after that, when we always had a police car waiting outside our home in the morning, follow us around the townships. I was locked up more than usual after that and spent more than in my fair share of time in prison cells, getting picked up in townships and in the Cape Flats. So yes, it became a real black eye for South Africa. The currency took a hammering. So yeah, it was far more of an event than I realized at the time.
Chris, 3 years later, after the massacre, there is an inquest conducted, and it is generally found, yes, police acted incorrectly, but no one has been held account. In fact, one of those police officers, and the van eventually becomes a Democratic Alliance councillor here in the city of Cape Town until a couple of years ago. After this thing comes to light publicly, the Democratic Alliance then issues then disciplinary hearings against him, and he is then removed. But you also testified before the TRC at the time. In terms of justice, and we have the Campepe Commission now on almost a restarting of the TRRC. From your point of view, what would justice mean 40 years on?
Well, very little. I think about 40 years on, and I wonder about those kids that walk past that rather sad monument in Thornton Road that's a little unkempt and probably not as well looked after as it should be. And I wonder if those kids even know the name of Sean, Jonathan, and Michael, the kids that are probably roughly the same age now who died there. I wonder if they're even aware of it. I think justice 40 years on looks a bit thin to me. I've been out of the country for a long time. I've just recently returned, and so I'm trying to catch up with the feeling in the country and what it means to be a South African. And it's quite a learning curve for me too.
Yeah. Chris, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Chris Everson, he is still a CBS camera operator. He was the one who filmed in the 15th of October 1985 that apartheid police ambush of protesters in Thornton Road. 3 young people die, including 2 children, killed by security and railway police who hid in wooden crates on the back of a truck before opening fire. Today we mark the 40th anniversary of what's known as the Trojan Horse Massacre. Chris Evans, thanks so much. Chris Everson, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.